Okay, everybody should be able to dial in now. I apologize about getting started a bit late here. As I mentioned Wednesday when I did the screencast, we're going to take a look at, we're going to move ahead and look at some of these cases here in Module 4. Now, we are moving a little bit ahead, but that's okay because I've got these flex time periods down here near the end of the course, so it's not that big of a deal. Just to go through with what we've got going on for this week, and I'll go ahead and the power ain't that, you should have uploaded that already, and then the same with Hewlett. And we talked, and I asked you to go ahead and take a look at some of these resources here about shadow pricing and sensitivity analysis. And this is a way for us to get a little bit finer cut or look at the results that we get when we go through the process of running the optimizer. Now, also covered a couple of things there. We talked about the efficient frontier and portfolio theory. And that was simply because we had covered that in Hewlett, and we looked at that problem. Now, here in Module 4, of course, we're working the cases a little bit ahead. We're going to look at 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of problems where we can use the optimizer to look at what our options could be or look at the possible outcomes if we should change some of the variables. And I've got the pages there for you, so let me fire up my book app and we'll go from there. And so let me get logged in over at VitalSource. And let me get myself logged in. I do apologize. I have had one of those weekends. We all have them. All right. There we go. Oh. It continues. Now, let's see, this is going to give me trouble. It figures I'd have this issue. Yep, it figures. Well, I'm going to dispense with that for now. You have a textbook there you can take a look at and follow along. But like I said, we were jumping ahead a little bit in the cases, and I had that information there for you in terms of using the sensitivity analysis. I think the text does a pretty good job of talking about that. But this Easy Excel Easy, pardon me, that website does, I think, a better job of it. And so, okay, why are we looking at that and shadow pricing and dual values and that type of thing? And the reason is it gives us a picture of how the objective function will change with each additional unit or change of output. And so it's kind of like doing a marginal utility analysis. That's really all there is to it. That's what's going on. Now, those two links there that deal with the geography of the efficient frontier, those are, especially if you're a finance major, those are something you really ought to take a hard look at, because what they show us is that there are any one of a number of ways that we can get an optimal portfolio, if you will. And when we did that case analysis, Hewlett was a company that was in the process of trying to figure out their cash flows over a period of time in terms of meeting some annuity requests. And I'll just go ahead and pop this up here, zoom it up a little bit. But as you can see, and I'd given you a couple of ask you to tweak them just a little bit to see what happened. The price of the 3 bonds, a couple of increase, and of the 3 bonds if the price increases, and then if the price decreases, and what that would look like in terms of new prices, and then in terms of what things would look like in terms of the minimum funds. Now, this is a minimum fund. The minimum funds, this is a minimization problem because this company wants to have enough cash to pay the obligations as they're lined out there. They're on row 17. By the same token, they want to have additional funds to reinvest to create some buffer, maybe to generate some additional fees for themselves. Who knows? But nonetheless, they use that minimization there. And as we played with those different bond prices, we could see the different results. And then we could go in and do a sensitivity analysis to see how a 2.5% change in the bond price up or down, north or south, positive or negative, would change the minimum funds required. So we're moving from just simply looking for an efficient, for an objective function to trying to start to say, okay, if I change, and even ahead of if I change a certain variable or an input, what do I get? What we start to move into is what kind of change do I get given in terms of relative magnitude? And so that's the same as marginal utility. If you have a 1-to-1, then for every dollar or every unit, the other goes up by 1, or discount, same story. And again, we're assuming these are linear data. They'd have to be for them to operate like this. This next, I want to go back over to the modules, and these 4 cases over here in module 4, which is next week, okay? And that's the work that's due next week. But I want to take some time to speak with you about them for a very simple reason. Now, before I do that, let me say this. I have some information here for you, or some additional resources that would be a good idea for you to take a look at. One is a little bit of history about the electronic spreadsheet, how it got invented and put together. You live in a world where we have these tools. It used to be you didn't have those tools. You worked with pencil and paper, and calculator, and things were much slower. Then I think it would be useful for you to see some information about operations research, or what people will call management science. There's still some arguments among scholars between the two, and which is this operations research or management science, or is OR one part of management science. But suffice it to say, the techniques, the models, and we'll see them as we do look at logistics and things of that nature, these models all emerged out of the logistical challenges of the Second World War, when we were taking people and equipment, et cetera, and putting them halfway across the world, and they had to be there at a certain time, so forth. The amphibious assaults that were characterized in the Pacific theater, and then of course there was D-Day. There was also at the south of France, they also were invaded, and the invasions of Sicily and Italy. Those required great timing and the ability to move people and to understand things like process flow. Otherwise, what could happen is you'd have people in a wave of assaults as they come forth, and if things are not timed properly, you could start having people pile up on people, and then you've got a real problem on your hands. So they wanted them timed out at certain intervals. So these kinds of challenges, the challenges of getting equipment to the people in China who were fighting the Japanese, birthed a lot of these techniques that we see here. So I think it's good for you to see them and see a little bit of the history of them and how they're developed. Then I've got a spreadsheet there on leisure airlines and their airports, and we might do a little bit of messing around there with your geographic distribution. And then I got a PowerPoint that talks about geography and how it impacts businesses. all businesses are located spatial, they have a spatial element to them. If you're a retailer, it's very obvious. If you're a distributor, it's a little less, but still obvious. If you're a manufacturer, it's even less obvious about how important it is in terms of where you locate. That might be resources, that might be access to major highways, etc. In the United States, it's pretty easy. In Western Europe, it's pretty easy. Japan, China is slowly, the coast is developed, it's slowly starting to work its way into the interior. But every company that does business in any way has a spatial element to it. Even if you're just a small retailer here in town, you're depending upon people to supply you stuff and to send things to you. Now, when I used to teach the policy course, I would ask students there who were typically seniors, well, if you got a job going on, what's happening? The accounting students almost always had jobs, sometimes the finance students, but I'd often see some very quizzical looks like, and I can tell you this, there are some tremendous opportunities for you out there in the field of logistics, okay, distribution. They are really, really wanting people who are going to be comfortable working with some of their tools like logistics tracking, things of that nature, and who are promotable, and that's you with a college education. So I would encourage you to maybe look at doing an internship with one of those companies, or perhaps maybe doing a practicum. I'm not sure. I guess you could still do those. And certainly I would not leave them out of the mix. And you can go find those companies. You could do some searches on Google and find out where they're located and all that. Some of it is not really exciting, I guess, in the sense it's not exciting until somebody's order doesn't get filled or your order doesn't get filled. And then you understand how important it is, especially if you're talking about a very, very expensive equipment that you need to have at any given moment. Now, that being said, here's a nice little resource about walks us through the economics of flying commercial airlines. Now, we've just had Herb Callahan, Kellerman, I have to look at his name. The guy that founded Southwest Airlines just died. And he founded that company and he changed the economics of airlines and commercial airlines and how they do business. And so he saw the paradigm they were using, he changed it and really took the market by storm. So that's a resource there that I'd like you to take a look at. Now, I want to walk us through here and let's take a look at some of these cases. And the relaxed case is over on pages 156 to 159. Okay, and let's open it up. Oh, pardon me, it's due there. Did I have it? Yeah, I'm going to have to. I think I might have the key here somewhere. If not, we'll just get the files and I'll grab it out of the. Let's see what I ask you to do first of all. Okay, I guess this is going to take a look at it. All right, okay. Well, let's go to the files section. And you'll want to do that. I have the access. I have files there. So let me grab those. And away we go. And yeah, I may just not have it on this desktop. All right. And it's going to be under the Anderson files. There it is. The student Excel files. And you'll see that. And we'll download that and then we'll take a look at that. I think it's over in chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken. All right. And back there. And let's go back to the modules. Now let me grab the file for just a second. That's interesting. Okay. Let's see. I need to go up probably to 5. It has been one of those days, weeks. All right, let me download it again. And it's going to be on pages, I think it's 132, starts at 132 in your textbook. And I'll open this up. Let me look at 5. Okay. I'll go back up. Was it in 6? So let's see. It should be in 7 then. Not in 7. Can somebody tell me what chapter those pages are in? Chapter 4. All right. Thank you. Yeah. My apologies. I'm snake bit this week so far. All right. All right, there we are. Yeah, all 4 of them. Hewlett, Janders, Relax, Welty, and Janders. Okay, and there are 4 there. So let's open up the Relax file for just a moment, okay? Now, I didn't have us do any kind of manipulation with these. I'll check back here in just a minute and see if we were going to. But I want to take a look at it for just a minute. Now, this whole week, and yeah, once the crush of all the weirdness that's happened to me kind of came in here, we're going to see that the optimizer is a tremendously versatile tool that we can use to work through some of these problems. Now, here is a lake and development company, and if I'm not mistaken, they're looking at their advertising portfolio, and that is trying to get the maximum exposure based on media buys, okay? So if you look up at the top here, this first matrix you're going to see starting there in A3 under the media, they've got 3 different types of 5 different types of buys, and they've got how much it will cost them, to the kind of reach that they'll get. Now there's eyeballs or contacts, people, the cost per ad, the availability, what's available to buy, and then some kind of exposure of the ad. So they're looking at minimizing their costs in terms of the customers that they reach, but they want to maximize, okay, their overall exposure. Okay, and here's an example where they're using, this is for folks in marketing trying to figure out a marketing buy. You with me? Now, there's some terms in here. I'm not a marketer, so there's some terms in here I kind of have, but yeah, I'm not really bored in on that because that's not my functional specialty. But this tool will let you start to work through the process if you're working with the management team, or say you are the marketing expert, to say, here's a way that we can look at our buys and what kind of exposure we get. In other words, the bang for the buck that's created. And so let's go ahead, and if you haven't done that, if you don't have, you should have the solver set up. If you haven't, you want to and go ahead and add it. And here we start and we have the objective function. And notice here, okay, first of all, we're in a minimization mode, pardon me, maximization mode. And we want to maximize B15, which is the exposure from our ads. We want to get as much of our name out there as possible, the greatest number of people, eyeballs, etc. Everybody with me so far? Yeah? Okay. Now, if you look at if you flow down to the next step, we're talking about changing the variable cells, okay? And those are B13 through F13, okay? So they're talking about these constraints that we're operating, B13 to F13, and we're looking at the ad placements, excuse me. Then we have some constraints. We have some constraints that are based upon the amount of money we have, okay, as you scroll down here. We have some constraints on that. And you'll notice that some of these, they all use Boolean operators. And notice we've got a pattern here where we've got to have, in terms of our reach, in terms of the number of TV ads, we have a minimum amount we want to reach or greater. And then the budget, we want it to be at a certain amount of dollars or less. The same things for the overall budget. Okay. Now, if you look up here, you can start to see that we would have some options. Now, there's one final piece of this that I want to go back to and look at, and that is we're assuming that these data are simplex. In other words, we're assuming that the more I spend overall, the greater the reach that I'm going to have. I'm not assuming that there's a point where where the law of diminishing returns sets in. I believe I'm not at that scale, all right? And so we're assuming we're still in that same type of model, but we're looking at a media buy here and how would we maximize the exposure? And so we go ahead and run it. Now, let's go ahead and click solve, okay? And let's see, find my, there we go. And we get a solution. Now, as you see there, once it identifies and tells us we have a solution, we can get the following reports: the answer, the sensitivity, and the limits. Okay? And we'll click OK. And it's going to generate those reports for us, and they'll show up for us in the bottom in the tabs. Got it? Now I'm in a place where I say, all right, I understand a little bit about sensitivity analysis. It's just simply, it's incremental analysis. It's what kind of marginal utility do I get for one additional dollar I spend or one additional person I add or whatever. That's basically what's going on. And we're also wanting to see those variables that are sensitive that really, if we change it, it has a big change on the entire, on the objective function. So we want to look to see what's really sensitive. What is it that we can look at? Now, let's do this sensitivity report first of all. And notice, here's the key piece of this, right? I can't tell you, I simply cannot tell you what an incredible tool this is. Now, 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, only the top companies of the world had this type of capacity to run an optimization schedule this easily. You had people who you'd put the data together and you'd run a program and you'd get the output. Today you got a piece of software like Excel, and there are other products out there that are designed to do the same thing. So this is a fantastic thing, but it's of really no use if you're not up to stuff in terms of how well you understand what you're looking at or how you use it. And we'll take a look at this for a moment. It's got an allowable increase and allowable decrease, okay? And so that's the first thing I want to look at in terms of the final values. And I also want to look at the shadow prices. Now I can see up here on the variable cells the kind of flex I have or don't have. And then I can see down here on the constraints what I get in terms of increases. And you can see on the shadow price, for example, on the number of TV ads on the left-hand side, the shadow price is minus 25. So for every additional TV ad we run, we're not getting any bang for the buck. Okay? We'll be overexposed in that particular media buy, and we're not going to get anything else out of it. And he said, well, where would you get all these data that you fed into the optimizer in the first place? Well, as I've said before, if you've got junk that you put in there, you'll get junk out. The bottom line, though, is this. If those figures are industry standards, historical data, maybe both, maybe you've had some media, a boutique come by and show you a buy package for your product or your product service bundle, how you would operate, then the bottom line really is, if you've got decent numbers that you've fed into the optimizer, into solver, you've got now the capacity to say, where might I be biting off too much, and where could I maybe make some adjustments? Now, one of the things that's interesting is, and as you look at the variable cells or the constraints, you really want to fix your attention over on, first of all, in terms of reduced costs, okay, and shadow price. And if you look at the ads placed, you could see that you've got a couple of them dealing with this, I guess it's ETV, whatever that is, and then you've got this the TV ads, the total TV ads, and you can see in each case you're not getting much. You can add 65, you can add another value of 65 on, but you don't get much for it. So you look for those kinds of patterns. If you see some patterns where there's where they look like they mirror each other, that's a sign of one important thing. Number one, you probably are working with linear data, so that's been a good choice on your part. Number two, you really don't. You have some leverage, but it depends on the way that you want to go with the leverage. So there aren't too many secrets that are here hidden in these data. The shadow pricing, you could look here and you could see for in both of these sets of data, the variable cells or the constraints, you're looking at a shadow price or a reduced cost, okay, that's negative. Okay. So that's good news in the sense, it's good news in the sense you can reduce the cost. It's bad news in the sense that you'll reduce your reach. Now, let's look at the limits report. Okay. Now, let me stop for a moment and say this. I don't want to oversimplify this tool, and I don't want to oversimplify what you've got here in terms of the numbers. Okay. You would probably have, you're probably going to have, well, let me put it like this. Your capacity or your team's capacity or your company's capacity to use this and to use it effectively is going to be driven a lot by experience. The more experienced you are, the better you're going to get. There's a learning curve to using this thing. And there's a learning curve to understanding the subtleties between each of these media outlets that you have and the mix. So that's why, we've got people who leave here with a degree in marketing, and they go out and they start to understand how to do marketing, and you understand how you do media buys and that type of thing. That's something I feel, but I guarantee you, you're really taking a look at, I'm trying to find a batch of something that will work. It's like if we were trying to make a recipe for a meal, we're going to have certain foods, certain amount of it. We might have seasonings, things we add to it, all that business. It's so different. So I don't want to oversell the value of this tool. If it's in the wrong hands, it can be disastrous. If it's in the right hands, it can be a very, very powerful tool. Now, one of the things that is not taken into account here, and let's go back to the solution for a minute. One of the things that's not taken into account here is anything that if I recall the case correctly, there's nothing really there in terms of seasonality. And if you're a marketer, you know things are seasonal. Some of those flow with the calendar. Some of those flow with marketing events. For example, the years when Apple was coming out with each iteration of its iPhone, it was almost like a seasonal kind of thing because they would time the introduction of that new iPhone, usually around, if I'm not mistaken, usually around the spring when sales might be down, or right at the start of the fall, so you could get in, so they could get into the holiday sales. All right. So the extent to which you got to look at these and say they're seasonal, that's going to be a matter of experience. So those are the kinds of things that you want to have a mental note about when you get ready to put this type of thing together. Now, there are people out in the world, and most of them are working in Manhattan this morning, who can, on the back of an envelope, tell you, well, we'll do this ad, blah, 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 we'll buy here, we'll have this, and we'll get, okay, and here's how many millions we'll reach. Those people are either highly trained, highly experienced people, or they just have a gift. And they just have a knack for understanding how that all flows together. For the rest of the human race, we try to study it and understand how it is that those things go very, very well. And it's not too much, I guess, the public's fixation on advertising and media buys of that type really is, as you know, is around the Super Bowl. And it's all the Super Bowl ads have taken on kind of this thing of themselves, and all these critics that say, well, this is a good ad, this is a bad ad, blah, blah, blah. Who knows? And when they're charging, so many half $500,000 for 30 seconds or whatever they charge now, some outrageous amount. In some ways, this model kind of goes out the window and you say you pay the price. But if you had some consistent placements, in other words, you're buying some ads and then you're getting some web banners and things, this starts to give you a tool also for you to use if you decide that you want to engage in contract negotiation. Okay? And you could, for all intents and purposes, start to plug the data in here. And you can have, if you had historical data, you really would have a basis to say, look, here's what we spent, here's what we got. And we're not getting what we ought to be getting based upon what we've paid you and what the industry standards are, or what we're hearing or seeing in data reported in trade magazines or whatever. A lot of times that's very, very highly guarded information and you just can't get it. So there's a lot here. I would say that those of you like me who are not marketing people, but if you're running somebody's company, or you're running a division of their company, or you're running your own company, and you have someone come to you with something other than this, I would say think very, very carefully about it and ask yourself, if you don't see some gray hair and wrinkles across the table, I'd say, I better be dealing with a genius here, or some type of savant, because I'm putting their life in my hands. The wrong media buys can really cripple a company. If you're a retailer, you could really put yourself in a world of hurt. And I know this. I have a good friend whose family had a jewelry store in Oklahoma City, and they had some internal strife and politics, and it got to the point I said, please, I'm your friend. Don't pay me anymore. So let me just try to help. And their problem was around how did they market themselves? Okay. Now there's one firm in Oklahoma City, and you probably know who they are because you know their Christmas jingle, which was just genius when they came up with it. And they played that thing every year, and they obliterate everybody else. Their sales are off the charts. Even the big people, the large retailers that come into the malls, those folks can't match up with it. They just can't. And they're, as I worked with them, and they eventually went out of business because they wouldn't embrace the internet. They asked me as they closed, why did this fail? I said, well, there's two reasons. I said, number one, you didn't engage e-commerce, which you probably should have. I said, number two, I'm not certain that your purchase experience was what it ought to be. Okay. And they said, what do you mean by that? I said, well, when I walk in, you have a lobby the size of a closet, and you walk people back through. They're buying jewelry from you, and their average purchase is, I don't know what the average purchase was, but it was several $1,000s because they were selling some high-end stuff. And you don't even offer them a cup of coffee. And I said, that's not going to work. But they didn't want to expand. They didn't want to leave their location because they felt like their location was absolutely ideal. And from my standpoint, looking at it, it was not. There was enough parking. There was enough space. And they had looked at anchoring into one of the malls. They didn't want to do that. And eventually I just came privately. And now if they've asked me, I would tell them, I think you just simply got in a rut and you weren't willing to change and go with the flow or try to match up. Now, there's a company, they said, well, who would you think is a standard setter? And I mentioned a company, they're a company up in St. Louis. They're called Shane Company. And they're in, I think they have office in St. Louis. I think they're in Phoenix, Denver. They have a really beautiful showroom. And they also have a foyer, a waiting area, twice the size of this classroom. And they've got coffee and hot chocolate and candy and all this stuff. And what's the point? Well, the point is you have a great experience while you're having your stuff cleaned, okay, or you're having it looked at and on a warranty basis. If you walk in and you got a crowd of people with you, it's 5 people and and then the other 2 people, maybe they're getting married and half the family comes along and they're going to choose the wedding ring. You have those things work, and you got to have a place for those people to sit. And it's really just also an issue of just a very welcoming kind of environment. And they do very, very well. I'm not sure. I would have to get on the net and look, but the way they lay their showroom out, it absolutely maximizes any kind of result that they want to get. The lighting is nicely done. The cases, it's obvious because they're a long time family outlet, that it's obvious that they really have a good handle on what they just have an intuitive sense of what people are after. And they're very profitable, and there have been folks try to buy them out and they won't sell out. Why would they, with the kind of money and value that they get? They get customers for life, I can guarantee you that. Well, that all being said, this is just a nice little start in terms of this type of, this remarkably versatile tool that we've got that we can use to see what kinds of operating results we can get, okay, if we do certain things, that is our variables, and if we operate within a certain set of constraints. And we're also allowed, because it's using a mathematical model, if we want, to tweak it and see what things would look like if we change. But the one thing I want you to impress you with this week is a very simple thing. Optimization is it's a mindset that says, I'm going to make the best that I can with what I have, the resources available. And I'm going to make sure I allocate my resources as well as I possibly can. And I'm going to also operate from the standpoint that there's probably not one answer. There's a whole continuum of answers that run from really good to really bad. And the last one is this. There is absolutely no substitute for experience, okay? When I teach these courses, especially this one, I don't want you to ever leave with the naive assumption that you know everything and the people who you interact with are a bunch of stupid dummies because they've been there 30 years, what do they know? Nor would I want you, on the other hand, okay, to believe that because they've been there for 30 years, they know it all. There's stuff they can learn from you, insights that you can gain. But this tool is a good talking point that allows people to come together and try to look at potential outcomes. And that process is, of course, feeding in data, and then that process becomes the questions of the sensitivity analysis and my limits. What does it look like if I shift resources to here or to there? And you can do this, and you can reduce a lot of the company politics that get involved in these things. That little firm I was telling you with, it's no longer in business. It was owned by mom and dad who came to Oklahoma City a long time ago. Mom and dad ran and there were 2 boys and a daughter, and the 3 siblings all helped run the business. And then as mom and dad receded in the background, there was a battle between the 3 siblings over who would run the company, who was the best prepared, who was the person. And it was interesting because one of them is a person whose thing was marketing and retail. The other was a person whose thing was gyms. One of the top, there's some kind of certification or something that he went through, but his appraisal is good just about anywhere in the world. And so he really understood stones and what you're buying and cuts and how that all works. So you had these 2 people, kind of inside person, outside, and then you had the sister who was really kind of more about understanding, just handling the customers and making contacts with people. So they had a unique set, but they could never get it to gel. And this is a company that had 12 employees and people fighting over their titles all the time. It's ridiculous. And so they're gone. And it's sad. Very, very sad. Very, very sad. And like I said, at a certain point, I quit taking money from them because I said, this is not fair. Any advice I give you, it doesn't help you. You don't listen. And so if you really don't, if you just want me to hold your hand, I'm here to do that too, to bounce stuff off and if you want to have a meeting where you can yell at each other, hey, I'll sit in there. Yeah. At a certain point, you're my friends, and I'll let you listen. I'll process it. And it was like that. Family businesses can be something else. Well, what I'd like you to do now for Wednesday, let me close this off here. Let's go ahead and take a look. And for Wednesday, I'd like you to take a look at those other 3 cases that are over there in Module 4. Now, I understand and I realize that we're working a little bit ahead, okay? So I'm doing this for a reason. I don't believe in the assignments that I give you any manipulation of the data. Let me pop over there and see for a moment. Let's take a look. And okay, no, I don't ask you to do anything, but here's what I would like you to do. Take a look at the surrounding narrative out of the text, all right? For those cases, relaxed, wealthy, genders, and leisure, they're all very different. The leisure airlines is the one that really I'm most interested in because for a long time I've studied phone companies and the airlines because I think they're 2 extremely interesting businesses. Now, I'd like you to take a look at those, and then when Wednesday, okay, I'll have a pre-recorded screencast for you that you can watch that. Remember, I put that in my schedule, so I won't do a live cast. I've got to haul a person around to get to some medical appointments they can't get to otherwise. And I got a couple myself. But to make a long story short, I will do a screencast, and I'll have it there pre-recorded for you. And what I plan to do is to go through those other 3, and I'd like you to have some sense of what's going on. And I would say this, if you would like to, because these are workshops, okay, this is a way for you to learn. if you tried to manipulate some of the variables there and do that, I'm fine with it, to see for yourself changing some of those, what things would look like. And I'm not going to count on for you doing that. That's why we had the workshop, so we could see and we can learn, and hopefully that'll work itself out. Okay, folks, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I'm sorry we got started a little bit late, but we did go a couple of minutes early over, so we ended up at 50. And thank you for the good work you're doing so far. Anybody have any questions? All right, thank you much, folks. Have a good one.